I'm Brian Weeks. I'm a technical specialist with ATG. Today we're going to be covering Revit Family Workshop, and we're going to be modeling non-parametric furniture. Can everyone hear me okay? Okay, good. Everybody's saying yes. So at the end of the presentation, we will follow this up with a Q&A. So there is a chat window, so if you have any questions, I can answer those at the end of the presentation. So course description, today we're going to be modeling a furniture family that is non-parametric with the exception of the material parameter. And what that means is that I'm not going to be doing any dimensional parameters or length or any of that thing of that nature. And so it's just a non-parametric chair, extrusions, blends, sweeps, swept blends, and voids. And then of course, like I said, the only parameter we will be looking at today will be the material parameter, because we're going to add that to our model. And I'm going to show you that technique. So we're going to review the basics of forms, because some of you may be new to modeling within Revit. We're going to determine the reference planes for those forms on the piece of furniture that we're going to model today. We're going to create that model using those forms. And then we're going to create a material parameter, a material asset, and apply that to the model. Now, this is the process that I use for modeling furniture within Revit. You may have a different workflow, but today I'm just going to share you my workflow, and maybe that'll help with your modeling. So today we're just going to start off looking at the basics of forms. Solids and voids are the two primary forms that are used in Revit. It's important to understand the aspects of forms and the form profiles that are used in order to model properly and use those forms correctly as you're modeling. So we have extrusions, blends, revolves, sweeps, and swept blends. And then the voids of those forms are identical as well, voids in the absence of the solid. Typically, your model will not use every type of solid and void, and that's why it's important to understand what the various types do. So we're going to go ahead and look at briefly the types of forms. First, we're going to look at the solids. So an extrusion is a form that's identical in shape at both the reference plane and the top of the form. A blend is a form that can have two different shapes at the reference plane. Sorry, I don't know why that, yeah, there we go. At the reference plane and the top of the form. A revolve is a form that's the same profile that rotates around a central axis. A sweep is a form that's a 2D profile that's swept along a line path and is identical in shape at both ends of the path. And then a sweep blend is a form that's two different 2D profiles swept along a line path and is a different shape at each end of the path. So the void forms are identical to their solid counterparts, except the fact that they're voids, they cut through the solid. Getting to these as your form and select which form you want. It's very intuitive with Revit that once you click on the menu at the top and you click on the form, it's very intuitive as to what the next step is. Now, one thing to mention as well, when you do a void extrusion, as you see there, it's yellow right now because it's not cutting a solid. So if you model your voids, and you have some voids floating around in your model that are yellow, that means that they're currently not cutting any particular solid form. Next is the void blend. Just working with a fun shape here to show you the capabilities of the blend. Now what happens here is Revit's very intuitive as well in that it will give you errors if things aren't cutting properly, or lines or solids or forms aren't cutting or aren't joining. So what happened there was that the solid and the void were actually had uh, the same outside edge, and so your void was not cutting the solid, and Revit told you so. Hey, this isn't working out right. In which case you kind of undo, go back and look at your void and or your solid, um, and correct that. So a lot of flexibility with just these five, I'll say five forms, and then the two different types of forms, solids and voids. You get a lot of flexibility, especially in your modeling techniques that you can use. And thank you all for kind of bearing with me on this. I just wanted to make sure that we all understood the various aspects of solids and voids and the forms associated with that. And lastly, a sweep blend, two different profiles on each end. And there I hadn't selected the correct profile. Use cut to cut the void out of the solid. And there you go, just a brief introduction to solids and voids. So next in my workflow, when I'm creating furniture and modeling furniture, is I'll determine reference planes. Typically, when you're doing modeling furniture, you're not going to have your reference plane just sitting, at the main floor. That's typically where the furniture rests, but then the forms themselves will not be parallel or perpendicular typically to the floor plane. So if you do your advanced work and you kind of plan out your model before you just jump in and start modeling, you can determine where you're going to need your floor plane, such as this. Is this your chair seat plane? Now this will create a plane that then I can create forms from and extrude the cushions and the armrests, etc., from that plane. Now, another plane to look at is, on the left in plan are the chair legs, because they are also in a different plane. So I'm going to create a front leg plane and a rear leg plane. And then I can just mirror those two extrusions along the mirror line there in the center of the plan. So now that I've got the reference planes figured out where I want to put them, I can create them. Now, let me kind of a sidebar here before I get into modeling. I kind of cheated a little bit because this particular furniture was actually a project that ATG was working on, and we had the ability that we scanned the client furniture in ahead of time using the Leica scanning services. And so by using the Leica Geosystem laser scanner, we were able to create a point cloud, and then I inserted that and modeled the chair more accurately. Now the bad part is that, well, not bad part, but just the fact of it is that Revit point clouds, they can be inserted into a Revit project, but not a Revit family. So my workflow is that I insert the point cloud into a project file, a new project file, and then I draw the line work outlines that you see there on the right, showing the plan view and the side elevation. And then I also have a front elevation. I'll draw those in Revit project file, and then I export those as DWG line work and create separate files of elevations and plans. And then I can insert those DWGs into my Revit family template. And so by doing that, now I can use those as guidelines, the outlines, using them as guides to model the forms. And so if that sounds like something that your company might be interested in, you can get more information about ATG laser scanning services from your ATG sales representative. All right, well, now that I kind of gave you a little background on how I got these magical CAD elevations and plans, I'm going to show you how I use them. So I open a new file, new family, furniture family. I'm going to insert the CAD. And I typically leave mine, I preserve the colors, because if it's black and white, you typically have a hard time seeing the black lines that you end up drawing. And so I like to leave those as color when I insert those. And then I'll align them, pin it in place. And now I'm going to do my side elevation. And again, it's going to insert at the point that it was scanned from the Leica scanning system. So you will typically have to align those correctly in your family. I didn't pin that one in place yet because I want to go ahead and insert my front one as well, my front elevation. And I'm going to make sure all these are lined up before I pin the front and the side in place. Align that to the midpoint. Align it front to back. Look at it in 3D. I kind of verify that it all lines up. And we're good. And I'll pin those in place, and then I'll model from that location. All right, so now that we've got the CAD layout, the DWGs, now the next step is we're going to create our reference planes. So if you recall the previous slide, we have 3 reference planes. We have a chair plane, or excuse me, a chair seat plane. We have a front leg plane and a rear leg plane. So I clicked on reference plane at the top. I selected the line tool to select that line from the DWG, the base of the seat, which created a new plane. And then I'm doing the same for the front and the rear legs, and then I name them, and that way I can refer to those as I'm creating the forms. That was easy. There's the three planes ready to start modeling. So when we start getting to the modeling furniture, like I said previously, everybody has their own workflow, but I typically like to start with the seat. That gives me a point of reference to refer to, and then I'll work to the seat back and the arms, and then the legs typically are modeled at the end. So first thing we're going to see in this model is we're going to go ahead and model the chair seat, and I'm going to use an extrusion first. And you want to make sure that you select the plane. You set your plane at the chair seat plane. I use the select tool to select the line work. And now I'm just aligning it to my plane. Shift it out a little bit to where I'm going over past the line work that I created in my DWG, because now what I'm doing is I'm creating a void extrusion. So by creating the seat in plan and then doing a void extrusion from left to right, that allows me to create the curves that I want to portray in the form. So if you think of it like an apple almost, you create the solid and then you cut away the pieces. That's my workflow. I try to think of what's the easiest way I can make this form and then cut away what I don't want. Well, typically it's going to be doing it in a plan block and then cutting it away. Now you'll also notice my void didn't go all the way edge to edge. So now I'm grabbing the arrow for the void extrusion, past the form extrusion, and now I've got the curves at the seat base. Now the reason I did it this way and why they're still flat on the edges is because my arms that I'm going to form here in a second, they're going to cover that up. Same with the back. It's going to cover that up. So I'm just showing the curve primarily at the front. All right, so next we're going to work on the back of the chair by using a form sweep. So if you recall from the beginning, a sweep follows a path and it has the same extrusion, the same sweep extrusion along that path at left and right. So we're only going to have to draw the form once that we want to extrude along this path, or I should say sweep. I keep saying extrude, that I want to sweep along this path. So I'm going to use my line selection tool and I'm selecting the outline of the seat back. And this is my profile that is going to be swept along this path. Now the reason there's a little offset there is because we're drawing in 3D, but the plan was drawn in 2D, so you have a little variance there, but we can clean that up at a later time after we get the form in place. So now we have our chair back. Next, we're going to work on the sweep blend. These are going to be for the arms. Now the sweep blend, if you recall as well, is a form that has two different shapes at the front and the back. And the reason I want to do this is because the way the chair form is that there's actually a larger arm at the front and a smaller arm at the back. So I'm going to select my profiles from the 3D, or excuse me, from the CAD 2D that I drew. Going to shift that over to our profile point there, our sweep point. And then once I trim it, hit OK. Now I'm going to select the back profile, or excuse me, the front profile. which if you notice is a little larger than the rear profile. And then I'm going to move that profile over to my point, my sweep point. Switch to 3D so you can see what's happening. Now, the swept path, because of where we selected it, is only the front, is only that side of the seat cushion. And so it doesn't extend past the back or the front. So the great thing about sweep blends is that you can select that path and change the lengths of it. You can still go back in and change the profile, front or back, and change it to fit the model pretty much like on the fly. So you can tweak it, make that arm match. There we go. And that'll match the back curvature of the seat back. So now we're going to go ahead and extend out the front, because that needs to extend past the cushion too far. And because we have a void extrusion there, it wasn't detecting that edge. So I had to go in and create a line, just a symbolic line that I could then snap to. Not perfect, but it's almost right there. So we'll clean that up a little more. Okay, so now we've got an arm on one side. We're going to go ahead and do a void sweep. And I typically work on one arm at a time, because anything that I determine to work on one side, if your model is symmetric, then you can just mirror the forms that you create on one arm and mirror it to the other side. So now we're going to create a void sweep at the back in order to trim up the arm to align with the back. Now, because typically as a modeler, you would want to just do just extend it and align it. But because the two forms were drawn at two different planes and using two different methods, two different forms, extrusions, and a sweep blend and a sweep, if you were to just align it, then what would happen is that arm of that chair would just align with the curvature of the back of the chair, and it wouldn't work. So basically what I do in my workflow is I will then create a sweep that's a void, because then I can sweep it along the back of the chair back, and then cut that void from my arm, from the arm sweep blend. So what's happening is we received an error because the sweep, the void sweep, wasn't cutting the arm correctly when I tried to cut it. And when you look at it, what's happening is the void sweep path was only traveling to the edge of the chair back path and not past the arms, the arm form. So what I've gone in is I've got to go in and modify that cut, or excuse me, that void sweep to extend past the chair arm, and then I can cut it. So now you can see where that cut. And now I'm going to go ahead and model it, or excuse me, mirror it. And then I can take that void sweep and cut from the form swept blend for the arm. Next, I'm going to smooth out and do a void extrusion on the arm to get the curve of the cushion to match the arm itself. So again, I just go to my side elevation, create a void extrusion. A lot of times modeling is just drawing it and then keep tweaking and modifying your extrusions and your solids and your forms to make it align to model what you need it to do. There's my void. I'm going to extend it past the arms. It's already trimmed one of them. So now I'm going to go ahead and cut the other one. And now I've got a curved chair arm at the front and a curved chair arm at the back to match the model. Now all the lines you're seeing, those are just the forms that are being cut and intersecting other forms. When you actually get into your modeling and you're going to render this, you can actually change your view settings to hide those edge lines. Now this is going to create the feet, the legs of the chair. I kind of cheated a little bit. I saved some time. I went ahead and inserted the CAD elevations off camera, and then I drew some model lines to reflect the true leg locations, because when you start, as you can see, as I'm selecting the outlines of the legs that were drawn in 2D elevation, when you select them in 3D, they actually don't quite line up. So what I have to do is do just old-fashioned lines off of the plans and elevations to get my legs in the right position. Selected the front chair leg plan, plane, and that's what's allowing me to draw that extrusion at that location. Now I'm going to narrow up the leg, extrusion. And next I'm going to do a void sweep on the front. So I'm picking a plane at the front of the leg. And then I'm going to create a void sweep to create the curvature of the front of that chair leg. Because right now when I did the extrusion, it's just an extrusion, but I want to put a curve in it. And again, as this goes through, if anyone has any questions, feel free to type them up on the chat window, because I know this is going through really fast. It's a lot of technique and a lot of clicking that goes by fairly quickly. So if you have any questions on how I did a particular task, feel free to type it up in the chat and I can answer those at the end of the presentation. So there's my void sweep. And you can see at the top it doesn't quite go all the way. Easy enough to fix, just edit it and edit that sketch and change your profile sweep line there to extend past it. That looks good. And then you can select both of them. I'm going to mirror those, the extrusion and the void sweep. So now I've got the front legs done. Now the back legs work the same way. Draw them off of the rear reference, the rear leg plane, which I just modeled off camera just to speed up the process. But now you have your fully modeled chair. You can go in and always tweak, of course, and change profiles to your liking to make it match what the client needs. But for now, this will work. We can now move on to the next step, which is creating a material parameter, a material asset, and applying it to the model. So properties that define a material are organized into assets, and then assets are properties that control characteristics of an object within Revit. So Revit uses 4 types of assets: graphics, appearance, physical, and thermal. And a material can have up to 4 assets, 1 of each type, but it can't have more than 1 of that same asset. In this window, most of you might be familiar with if you've worked with materials in Revit. This is our material browser. The top at number 1, those are going to be our 4 assets: identity, graphics, appearance, physical. Number 2 will be the button we push to replace and duplicate the asset. 3 will be a thumbnail swatch. 4 is properties of that asset. In this particular case, it's the appearance tab. And then 5 is going to be your material editor toolbar. So when I start modeling, especially when I'm using a client that has specific fabric materials that they want to apply, I will do the legwork. I will go to the website and I will download it from the manufacturer webpage. If it's a material swatch, such as a fabric or wood, anything of that nature, I'll go ahead and grab that image and as good of a resolution as I can get. I will then open it into an image editor and I'll convert that to grayscale and make it a bump file. And so what this bump file will do is give it a depth. It gives it adds a duplicate image to your material to give it a 3D texture and look. So we're going to go ahead and see if you can follow along. If you have questions on this, feel free to ask. Click on materials, duplicate the material, and I'm going to just rename it chair fabric. And I'm going to duplicate it again and call it chair leg. Pretty easy to follow along. Now, when I duplicated that, if you look up there at the top, it says default to. What I had to do was duplicate the asset, because if you have default on all those chair fabric and chair leg, it's going to be identical assets. So if you change that asset to default, it would be currently associated with all 3 of those: default, chair leg, and chair fabric, because all I did was duplicate the project material. I didn't duplicate the asset. So you have to make sure that you go in and duplicate the asset and rename the asset to the project material. And again, to do that, I clicked on that the 2 box with the arrows symbol to the top right at the appearance there. So now I'm going to start adding my material image to the project material I created for chair fabric. So there it is. I like to see it depending on what kind of surface it's going to be on to make sure it looks right. Right now the image is showing up as a 1 foot by 1 foot image. Well, that's just going to be a swatch of fabric. So I'm going to change that to be a little bit more realistic to maybe a 6-inch. Now I'm going to add a bump texture to it in the same method. Select on the image, upload the image bump. I'm going to change that bump image to also match the same scale as the fabric of 6-inch. Apply, and you can kind of see where even the swatch image now has a depth to it. It has a texture and it looks like fabric. I'm going to go ahead and do the same for the chair legs. So let's walk through this again. Select on the image, no image selected. Well, now I have an image. Now that's wood. It's currently at a 1 foot by 1 foot. I'm going to go ahead and change that too. Make it a little smaller because of the wood grain. So we're going with the 3 by 3 inch swatch. But when you see the sample up above, it didn't really look right. It looked too, you could see the gridding. So I changed it back to a 6. So once you do that, now we're going to create the actual material parameter. Pull up your family types, parameter properties, click on new. I just made a parameter, chair leg, and I applied that material to it. Again, click on new parameter, chair fabric, change the type of parameter to material, chair fabric. Okay, so I've created the parameters, but I haven't applied them to my model yet. So now I'm going to click on the forms, tab a couple times here to catch it sometimes, and I'm going to apply that form or that material to that form. Now I'm going to do the same for the legs. Click on the form, material finishes in the properties box. And now I've got both my wood and my fabric applied to my model. I'm done with the outline, the CAD outlines for now, so I'm going to unpin those and delete them. Uncheck show edges. And now we've modeled our chair. Now this again, if you recall, this is a family file. So now you've just created your first Revit family and you can insert this into your Revit project as a furniture piece. Wanted to show you real quick before we finished up here. I'm going to insert the family component and render it. So I created a new project file, insert that chair family into it, and I'm going to change it to ray trace so I can cast some shadows and get some fabric rendering. For this particular demo, that blue fabric, the bluish gray fabric, was a little bit dark, so I'm going to go ahead and change it real quick to a red fabric I made, just so you can kind of see the chair rendered a little better within Revit. And again, with the bump file, you can see the texture. It's got depth and the color. And that's the actual manufacturer fabric offered by this chair manufacturer. So hope you guys found this presentation informative and hopefully educational. I don't have any questions up there now, but nobody's typed any questions. But if you guys have any, feel free to chime in, and I'd be happy to answer any. I can also try to talk through some of the steps if I need to, because I know it went by really quick, but I wanted to make sure that we had time to talk about any of the modeling aspects. One question, how big is too big of a family? I'm assuming you're talking about in size. It's going to be dependent on really the size of your Revit project itself as well. Too many parameters. If you have a lot of errors within the family, that can cause the file to be larger. Most families that I create for furniture, for example, you should be typically under a couple megabytes, if that. What do I do if I don't have the ability to start with a point cloud to sketch model lines? Oh, that's a good question. So what you could always do as well is if you don't even have access to the actual piece of furniture to kind of measure and scale, then you could go to the manufacturer website, and in a lot of cases the manufacturer will have dimensions up on the website, and you can use the photos that they have. This is what I've done. Use the photos that they have on the website and then scale those appropriately within CAD or Revit, and then do your outlines from that. I mean, keep in mind that this is when I've modeled the furniture in these cases, it's been the client wanting to see, well, how's our space going to look with this furniture in it? I'm doing an office space or classroom. And so we'll model that to insert. So I think close is usually close enough in types of when you're dealing with non-parametric. If you're within a couple of inches to fit a furniture piece within a space, I think you're usually pretty good on placing it. So I would suggest, if you don't have the ability to start with a point cloud, research is always key. Go to the manufacturer website, research it, find the dimensions you need, and then insert photo images, manufacturer images into your Revit or CAD, and then you can draw your outlines from that. Any other questions? All right, well, guys, I want to say thank you for your time today, and I appreciate you sitting in on my first webinar with ATG, and I hope you enjoyed it, and have a great day. And be sure to contact ATG USA with any of your software support or team augmentation needs. Thank you, guys, and have a great day.